Hello everybody. In today's video we're going to be showing you exactly how to mate with two bishops. And so how we're going to do this is we're going to simply bring the two bishops up the board, right? And essentially by doing this, by bringing the two bishops up the board, we restrict the opponent's king into a box. So by keeping the two bishops next to each other like so, right? We don't want to give any checks, right? In a position like this here, when the king comes here, you don't want to give this check because you're going to allow the king further up the board. Ideally, you put the bishops next to each other in a way that's not a check, right? So that the king is forced back. So essentially, if you can see this, these two bishops do a very nice job of preventing the opponent's king from coming up the board. They also do a very nice job of restricting the king into a box. And so what this box is, it's a nice little box here, essentially highlighted in blue here for you guys. This box essentially is what you're trying to do for the opponent's king. You want to create this box and make it as small as possible. So essentially, we've created the box now. That's step one. We've created the box with our bishops. Now we bring our king up the board, right? Because you have to bring the king because the king is one of the crucial pieces to deliver mate. So you continue to bring the king. And now, essentially, they've put the king in an ideal scenario, right? Our bishop's covering these squares. If we bring our dark squared bishop up, it'll be covering these squares, which will force the king back to one of these three squares. So essentially you do this, you force the king back, and then you bring the other bishop up, recreating the box that we just saw, but making it smaller, right? Now you can see the box is only 6 squares. We've shrunk it quite a bit. Again, we can bring the king up the board, right? And rinse repeat, right? Now we can bring our bishop up, shrinking the box even smaller, right? So you bring the bishop up, and now we've shrunk the box even smaller. So now the box is only these 4 squares, and when we bring our dark squared bishop up, the box will be even smaller. So now we can bring the dark squared bishop to either side of the board, and essentially, as long as our bishops are not on g6 and b6, it's nice and easy for us. So essentially, you bring the dark squared bishop here, right, cutting off the rest of these squares, and what we've done, we've created the ideal scenario where we've got the king. Sorry, let me get rid of this arrow. We've got the king inside of this little 1x2 box. And so now what you want to do is you want to bring the king to g6 because our bishops are on this side of the board, right? On the king side. You want to bring the king over to b6. And what this does, by bringing the king over to b6, what it does is it frees up our light squared bishop from having to cover f7, and it frees up our dark squared bishop from having to cover g7. And so essentially, what we're going to do is, since our dark squared bishop is covering this diagonal, and our light squared bishop is covering this diagonal, preventing the king from coming out, right? You have to make a waiting move with the light squared bishop in a way that, so essentially what we're trying to do here is in this position, you have to be able to visualize that when you move this bishop away, right, we're freeing up the g8 square, and then what we're going to do is we're going to bring that bishop back to d7, right? Essentially forcing the king over, right? Because we're going to be covering, our goal is to cover the e8 square with our light squared bishop. So essentially we make a waiting move with the light squared bishop, and then we bring the bishop back to d7, forcing the king over. And now we have the ideal scenario because we bring the bishop up to e7, cutting off the f8 square. And now we've forced the king into the corner. However, if we give a check, they'll just come back out. And then if we give another check, they'll come back out and we'll be back to square one. So we can't give a check yet. So what we have to do is we have to give a waiting move, right? With the light squared bishop, with the dark squared bishop. So essentially, if you give a waiting move with the dark squared bishop, however, you won't be covering f8, right? So if you give a waiting move with the light squared bishop, essentially you're covering this square. Your king is covering these 3 squares. So the king only has these 2 squares to move. What you want to do is when the king comes back to g8, you want to be able to give a check. And then you give a second check, and it's checkmate. So essentially, now you have another waiting move with the light squared bishop. Anywhere on this diagonal will do, right? Because you can even go this way if you want, right? Because now when you give a check, this bishop's covering this square, this bishop's covering this square, and now the bishop gives checkmate because all the squares are covered. Simple and easy checkmate. We'll run through it for you again one more time. And you can simply direct the king into the corner using the 2 bishops and the king. You keep this g6 square free, or you keep this b6 square free for your king. Your king goes to one of those two squares, and you deliver checkmate. We're going to show you one more time, just to show you how easily it is, and we're going to go ahead and work on that. So bishop comes up, bishop comes up. You can simply bring the bishops up again if you want, or you can bring the king up, right? So now king is away. You can come here, you can come here. Continue to cut off the squares however you like, but easiest way is just to bring the king up and then bring the two bishops again, right? So bishop will cover these squares, this bishop will cover these squares, and simply continue to bring the bishops up. Bring the king, right? Continue to bring the bishops up. Continue to bring the bishops up, right? And now, remember, right, we've created a box, right? We've created a box. Here we go. King only has these squares. So we've created a box. Our goal is to reduce that box to be as small as possible. If we bring our king up again, they have to go back. So we can bring the bishop up here, and that would be an issue, wouldn't it, right? If we bring the bishop here, right, it's a legal move. However, what's wrong with that move, right? Oops, you've cut off all the squares because your king is too close. However, what you can do is, because the bishops have the king trapped in a box, you can simply bring your king back, right? Bring your bishop up, and bring your other bishop up. And now, again, right, we have the ideal scenario where the two bishops are on the 6th rank, right? Cutting off the king and essentially preventing it from going anywhere. It only has these two squares. What do we do now? I want somebody to comment down below what we're supposed to do now, right? In this position, we have a nice, easy way to win the game. We bring our king across over to b6. So we simply bring our king. Because they're trapped here, they can only move there and there. We bring our king over to b6, freeing up our bishops, right? So now, what we have to do is we have to create a way in which we can cover this d8 square. So we have to cover the d8 square in a way that will force the king that way. So essentially, we have to make a way to move with the dark square bishop, but you want to stay on this diagonal. The key idea is that you have to stay on this diagonal, otherwise the king will come out. So, simple waiting move, and then you simply block the square. And then you do the same thing with the light square bishop, except you don't need a waiting move because they were forced over. So you simply cover the square. And now you cannot cover this square because it would be stalemate. You always have to watch out for these little stalemate ideas. Don't stalemate your opponent in this winning position. So essentially, make a waiting move, right? Put your bishop behind your king. Can never be a stalemate because there's no extra squares covered. So essentially, then you bring the bishop back with check, king comes over, and you bring the bishop with check. This is the easiest way to mate the opponent's king with two bishops. The pattern is the same. That's it for today's video. Please don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.